Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. There are some wonderful guests and some wonderful projects to learn about. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Explore, Explain. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Jane Zhang to the episode. Jane, it's a great pleasure to meet you finally. Big fan of all your work and your processes in particular. For the benefit of the viewers and listeners, can you give yourself a brief introduction, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jane, and I am an independent data visualization designer based in Toronto.
Super. Well, in this episode, we're going to look at a project you launched in January of this year, 2021. A passion project, a personal project titled The Food Your Grandmother Made. So to begin with, for the benefit of the viewers and especially the listeners, can you briefly describe what this is, what it's about, what it looks like, please?
Yeah. So this is a print-based project that I built as sort of something to pass off to the future generation in my family. It sounds like very beyond my age because I'm still under 30 years old. For me to think about that, it was kind of weird. But I made this with that intention, and I decided to do it through data. So it's not just like a normal book or a memoir, but it's something that captures the essence of our life through food.
Yeah, and I think just sort of to begin the conversation then with that notion of the kind of origin and the aims and the kind of motivation. Obviously, this is a self-directed, self-initiated passion project. So in a sense, you've got a very broad canvas to tackle. And as you've said, there's lots of things you could have done about this topic. But to begin out, I love that kind of express motivation that you talk about. Almost this, in some respects, this fear that, aspects of your heritage, your mum, your grandmother that you speak about in the blog post that comes with this project, that certain identity, certain kind of cultural legacy may disappear if you don't step in and kind of intervene and do something with this. And I wonder, therefore, did that give you, did you feel a lot of pressure, therefore, to take on that responsibility? Or was it, in a sense, a very positive pressure because it kept you going, kept you motivated throughout the process? Because I know these things take ages to finish. So you need that kind of that fuel to drive you.
Yeah, that's a good question. It does feel like there's a pressure because I feel like people kind of forget about doing this kind of thing, but it is sort of like a way to preserve legacy, I think. And so within, I can only speak for Chinese culture. I know a lot of Asian countries and Asian cultures do this, but they have genealogy texts that records the history of the family. And I think about why that was done, and it's mainly so people aren't forgotten, they're remembered, right? And that's sort of one of the reasons that kind of drove me as well. In terms of pressure, I was afraid of making something that wouldn't be inspiring or fun to look at, or if it's too confusing. I don't know if like in future generation kids are more data literate, who knows? Or if they're interested in learning about it. But I thought of it more as like, this is just an experiment. I don't need to put too much pressure. I view everything as a prototype. There's always a chance for improvement. I'm still alive. I can still make changes later on, no pressure there. So absolutely. I just need to start. I think that was the most important thing.
Yeah. And I guess along the way, you've had the chance to eat some really nice food as well, which is a benefit, I guess. And I think this topic of food is fascinating because, food is inherently multisensory. It's colorful, it's textures, it's taste, it smells, it's ingredients. I mean, in many respects, it's a perfect topic for visualizing. And just to what you said there about the idea of, genealogy, I guess this is something that can then live onwards. It's not even just sort of memorializing history, it's taking history and passing it onwards and keeping it going, which I think is a terrific prospect. But were you even contemplating any other topic other than food and recipes? Were there any things that you could have done that you kind of rejected in favor of food as a subject, as a topic?
To pass on, you mean?
Mm.
No, I think
I think like stories, anecdotes, photos, travel
yeah.
stories. I mean, I suppose they were all possible, but in a sense, there's obviously something that's, I guess, crucial to your relationship with your family that is embodied through food. Would that be fair?
Yeah, yeah. I have like thoughts of writing a story of my mom.
Mm.
As someone who trekked, across the ocean to come to like she went through a lot to come here to Canada. So I feel I would like to eventually maybe write something about that. I wouldn't necessarily do a big project around data. I feel like that's just too dense.
Yeah.
But food is probably the one that made the most sense because it is so visual. It's the
Mm.
most accessible. Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
And one of the things that I love about your kind of backstory for the project as well is this idea of injecting data visualization into places that don't normally see or use data viz.
Yeah.
And I think that's a terrific idea, kind of, opening up these kind of corners that don't have this treatment. So, I mean, once again, I mean, we'll share in the blog post that comes with this episode, some of the other projects you've worked on. But is that always something that you're looking for, an opportunity to do something that not only hasn't been done, but really hasn't even seen a visual treatment like this before?
Yeah, it's what gets me excited about this field. I think it's so the one I did earlier is one about fighting games. It's about
Mm,
Tekken, and that one was super interesting because one of the so I went on the Reddit subreddit for Tekken, and one of the moderators told me I've never seen someone with your skill do something like this with our community.
right.
And for me, that was very exhilarating because there's so much opportunity. Data viz is very much confined within a bubble, I feel, and it makes sense. I think people need to specialize, people need to focus, but I think there's opportunity to bring it outside and show its potential to people who never have been exposed to it. I think that's what's really exciting about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there's something about the nature of a self-directed project and the absence of a client or a stakeholder who's kind of telling you what they want you to do. It is liberating, but it also comes at the cost of potentially scope creep,
Yeah.
lack of discipline, time-wise, and we'll come on to matters around that in a short while. But I do think it gives you a chance to sort of probe into areas that haven't benefit from such a treatment like this. And I
Yes.
know one of the things we'll come on to shortly about your own research into recipe books and what's
Yeah.
been done, what's inspiring is a lot of this is just written content. A lot of it is just
Yeah.
instructions, and it feels rich and right for something that's benefited from the treatment that you've given it. Um, Now, of course, it was something that was a self-directed project and something that you effectively worked alone on. And to that extent, how would your skill set, and I'm thinking specifically sort of technology skill set, typically sort of shape your choices? Speaking from my point of view, because I don't have advanced programming skills, I'm often drawn towards print projects or static works because, in a sense, my own skill constraints force me down that line. But I also just really enjoy doing print projects. Was this something that you felt would always be a print project because it's benefited the project itself, or do your own skills sort of shape you down that direction anyway?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in telling people to focus on their strengths and not
Hmm.
their weaknesses. I think there's nothing wrong with working on things you're weak and trying to hone it and develop it. But I think sometimes it can get you to a point where it's not productive, I think.
Mm,
And that can be very dangerous, I think.
yeah.
You might put yourself down, you might think you're not good enough. And so the way I approach it in my perspective and mindset is if I can only do certain things, I'm going to do it where other technology cannot do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it so good that other technologies cannot even achieve this result and can't even imagine it, right?
Right.
So that's how I perceive it, and that's how I approach it. I kind of like approach it very um, proactively and optimistically.
Well, no,
Yeah,
I like that, and I think there's something about when you are tackling potentially a novel subject,
yeah,
you've already got enough on your plate, for want of a better term. You've got enough to deal with,
yeah,
besides already also having to accomplish new skills along the way, which is, perhaps too much. But I also think there's something there about, again, going back to the idea of a self-directed project. When we talk about audiences and people who might use our work, you talk about the future generations of your family as being the kind of primary audience user that you had in mind. And that's quite a hard thing to kind of
Yeah,
abstractively sort of join the dots to. But
that's right.
do you feel that in some cases your own sense of you not just making this but using it as well is a good enough proxy for the kind of people who will eventually use it?
Yeah, I think it's such a hard question to do because like there's some of them don't exist yet. They're
Yeah, of
not
course.
necessarily born yet. So it's like I can't ask them even if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I think everything with thinking about the user always starts with an assumption, and usually that's like the best we can do.
Mm,
And I'm more similar to them than my relatives in China
mm,
because English is my stronger language, right? There's certain perspectives I have that my relatives in China don't have. So I think
mm.
I'm a pretty good way to I can relate to them in that way.
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, absolutely. And did you have a chance to kind of, I don't know, reach out to other people to test the work as it was developing, to test ideas, to run things past people and say, does this make sense to you? Because sometimes we can get a little bit too close to the project to not see some of the kind of little obvious failings.
Yeah, I share it with my friends and I
Mm,
ask them, and usually I make sure to do it early on because they'll point something out that I wouldn't have thought of and that I would have wasted time on. So I always make sure to check with someone or just get some feedback. Yeah.
So in terms of the things that you kind of work towards in terms of the deliverables, the outputs, in a sense, there's almost a split. On one hand, you've got the actual product itself. You've got the printed poster, which is about the kind of eating routines that you went through over 40 days, and we'll come on to that in a second. And kind of with that, there's some lovely kind of companion products, which is a how to read guide, a little fold-out assistant, but also this vellum
Yeah.
products. And it feels like you've gone on quite a journey with that as a material.
Yeah.
But I love how you've innovated there, again, with the idea that if that was digital, you'd have a hover,
Yeah.
a pop-up.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
don't have
Exactly.
that, so what's the best alternative?
Yeah,
Vellum.
that's right.
I mean, is that a material that you've used in the past? What kind of inspired you to use that in this particular project?
I've always wanted to use that. I've never used Vellum before. So this project was my first time using it and interacting with it. It's a real pain to print on, especially if you don't experience. But I've always wanted to do something like that analog. But I just never had a good project to do it. So this was my chance to do it.
Right. And I guess the centerpieces are these recipe cards and the recipe sheets that give
Yeah.
readers a sense of the dishes that you've picked out, and also the kind of the visual ingredients, which we'll come on to in the small details shortly. But then kind of alongside that, running in parallel, and I spoke before about how you're such a really strong process-minded person, is not just the detailed posting about the process you went through, but also this video, this stop motion video.
Yeah.
So speaking before about the the kind of technical repertoire that you'd normally use, this felt like something a bit of a departure, but a really lovely solution to try and articulate the project itself. So again, what made you think I'll do a stop animation video for this?
Oh, it's just way too complex to explain in text. It just makes them
Yeah,
it's a reason why commercials are a thing, right? It's
yeah,
it's a good way to explain how to use it. It shows the user and it shows some story, and people like passive consumption of information. So video, podcast is a good example. They make the most sense in terms of how to communicate to people. So I sort of have a marketing background, and I always think about the audience and
mm,
what they prefer. And so for me, like video is something I've always wanted to keep doing more of, but it's just really time consuming. But this one made sense because there's so many crazy components to it. There's a bunch of legends. There's many layers. If you just try to explain to that without a visual component or just in text, it's a nightmare.
absolutely. And I think the stop motion works so well as well. It just has that notion of being a kind of analog solution in a digital world, and it's
Yeah.
here are the different ingredients going onto screen. I really like it, and I've seen very few like that, so I think it's a terrific output from this work. The other thing I want to sort of touch on with regards to the products is, I mean, we mentioned about the possibility, a cookbook, for example.
Yeah.
That would be the kind of classic material to share things like recipes. And you did talk in your blog post extensively about research that you'd gone into looking at cookbooks, both good and bad, and the ones that inspire you. But what I loved about the kind of reflection that you spoke to about there was, in a sense, a cookbook was, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was kind of overwhelming because it was this big empty space that you had to fill,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
commitment. Whereas the process that you took, you kind of built up materials from the ground up, and it didn't have this limit. You could impose a stop point. Whereas
Yeah.
the pressure that that kind of empty blank canvas gives, can you just sort of speak to that idea of almost rejecting the cookbook as the thing that you're going to pursue?
Yeah, yeah. So the cookbook is, so I think the challenge I had starting off was trying to figure out a good layout to use.
Mm,
And a cookbook, a book is limited by pages. So whenever you print something, that's it. If you try to add more pages or move sections around in sort of a modular fashion, you have to sort of redesign everything. It's a system in itself, right? And rarely is it like an open system. You sort of have to adjust everything all at once. And so I thought, you know what, I'm not going to do it like this. I'm just going to try something that's a bit more modular. And
mm,
so the way I approached it was something that um, is very much like how games are designed, like tabletop games,
yeah,
which is they have a central component. And if they ever want to, they add booster packs, right? You can
yeah,
buy additional packs to it. You just add to it. You don't have to change a core structure. So for me, that made the most sense in terms of commitment and scope.
absolutely. And it's probably something you can, as you say, could revisit in due course. You can add to it.
Exactly.
And I suppose in this notion of legacy for future generations, they can add to it. You know, they can kind of almost pick up the
Exactly. Yeah.
same thing going forward. I mean, I can even see a point where you can create empty templates
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
let others use that. Um, and I guess the next thing I want to talk about in terms of the context for all this does come back to the point about the self-initiated project and timescales, and the existence or lack thereof of pressures that
Yeah.
force you to kind of get things done.
Yeah.
And you know, I've worked on quite a few big self-directed projects and have suffered
Yeah.
because there isn't that push
That's
against
right.
point.
That's
There's
right.
other work takes over. There's other priorities. I mean, can you just talk about how you did manage your time, but also reflectively what you might have done differently?
So I was sort of doing this full time at the time. I started more. I was like more serious about it in September of 2020. Like the time before that, I was mixed commitments with
Hmm.
work and also with different stuff. So by then, I decided to sort of chuck some of my client work and just focus a little more on data viz and just refine this vision I have for it. And so I put everything into it. And I had a lot of practice with self-directed work. I did a lot in the past to learn all the skills I currently
Hmm.
have and develop an interest, understand my style. So I think I had a lot of practice. I think that's really important. Like you don't get it right the first time. And a lot of it is about self-awareness, is understanding what times do you peak? You know, what times
Yeah,
doesn't work for you? How do you take a break? How do you refresh yourself? How do you get out of a mental block? How do you not put yourself down for taking, some time off of it, for example? How do you make it easy to get back into it? So I developed a lot of really interesting habits through this project. Um, so one thing I want to mention is I'm
mm,
really, I'm really like OCD about tracking my time. I track everything. I
mm,
track client work, I track personal work, and I track it so I know when to stop. I tell myself today I've done 4 hours, I've done 6 hours, I can stop. So that's one way for me to not overwork because
right.
I think a lot of times you do too much because you feel like you haven't done enough. But
Mm.
the thing about tracking and data is it's evidence to tell you to stop. It's interesting how it comes full circle.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when I track it, I can tell myself, hey, you did this much work, just go to sleep. You don't have to stay up late. And that's
Interesting.
really important in managing time. Another practice I developed was writing out next steps. So when I was done a session, I noticed because I was sometimes I would like shuffle between this project and other stuff. When I come back to it, even like 1 or 2 days later, I forget everything I was doing, and I had to spend a good half hour to readjust myself and try to remember what I was doing because my notes are all over the place. And I realized it would be a good idea to maybe just do a checklist at the end of each session. So next time I come back into it, I just follow that checklist. So there's a lot of different habits I developed to help me keep it going. But it was really important to reflect and think, okay, this didn't work out. What can I do to make it work out next time or make it better?
I love those habits. I must admit, I find it terrifically hard, maybe harder. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, possibly, I am. But to jump from one project to the next, or one type of work to the next, I just feel like it takes me such a long time
That's
to
right.
get out of that mind frame
Yeah.
into this next one. And although I do like gaps
Yeah.
within a project to let things just sort of percolate and digest, if that's too long a time, it's back to square one. And so I love the idea of leaving little notes for yourself so that when you pick it back up, you can keep that train of thought. Yeah, no, that's super. And I know that in your blog post you share so many different sketches and different ideas of concepts that you started with. And again, we'll come on to the actual final solutions that you did arrive at. But I think it's something that I always like to ask people on these episodes to just encourage sketching. And
Yeah.
it's not about art skills, is it? It's
Right.
about getting ideas out of your head and logging those ideas. And I guess it's also about logging mistakes and failures and things that you can eliminate from your thinking and logging them
Yeah.
so you are aware of the things that you've covered. Again, can you just sort of speak to how important sketching is for your process and your mindset in these type of pieces?
So I just want to add, I've never gone to art school.
Right.
That gives some credibility, I think. I can't really draw really well. I'm trying to learn, but it is more important about like how you put shape to thoughts,
Mm,
because thoughts is very abstract. It's
mm,
not tangible. And I remember asking one of my friends in graphic design, I said, how important is it to know how to draw well? And he said, you just have to know well enough to explain concepts. So that's very vague,
that's
but it's
great.
sort of like, can you do it enough just to explain something?
Yeah.
You don't have to be, an artist to do it. And so with the thing, even like writing, I think is very similar. Is when you write something down, you can do something with it. And it's like, it's no different than also prototyping. When you have a prototype of something, you can do something to it. But if it
Mm,
stays in your head, you can do nothing to it. You can't talk about what doesn't work or what works. So I think with sketching, it's a very similar idea. Is when I put on a piece of paper, I can even show it to someone. I can say, hey, what do you think of this? What does it look like to you? Instead of just keeping it in my head, right? So I
yeah.
think you don't have to have certain skills to do it. You just need to be able to express what you're trying to think, what you're thinking about.
Absolutely right. And as
Yeah.
you said, these little mental visualizations that you have are so
Yeah.
fleeting. And
That's right.
I mean, what drives me to do my own little note taking or visual sketching is the fear of forgetting a brilliant idea. The
Yeah.
idea that somehow you wake up in the middle of the night and think about something and you'd forget to log it. I'd hate
Yeah.
that. I'm sure it's the same with most creative pursuits.
Yeah.
Musicians who
Yeah.
in the middle of the night think of a riff and then forget to write
Yes.
it down. I mean, imagine that. Um, the other quick thing to start with in the kind of context and the ideas research. Obviously, the end products that we'll speak to are kind of folder pieces in many respects. And I loved how you spoke in your blog post about the almost the inspiration of brochures that you see from
Yeah.
museums, galleries, even sort of travel. So, I mean, that suggests to me that you're always on the lookout
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
other tangible things that you can bring into your thinking, especially the mechanics of the fold. I mean,
Yeah.
again, can you sort of speak to how that helps influence your initial ideas, even if it may
Yeah.
not be the thing that you end up doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say I'm a little bit like strict about collecting things, because one time I couldn't go to this festival, and I asked my friend, your one job is to get me the brochure, because I've gotten it for the past 2 or 3 years. You must get it for me because I can't go. So I'm very like, I really love collecting them because you see how they progress. Especially, it was like a festival I've gone to a couple of years in the past, and I love seeing how they change and how they try to update it. Um, so in terms of looking at it for inspiration and for ideas, I think it's really important to study what's been done. So
Mm,
I sort of have a design strategy. I have a design strategy background, and a lot of the things we were taught to do is look at precedents, design precedents.
yeah.
So look at what exists, study them, look at what was good about it, what could be better, how can you use it to modify to your own stuff. I think doing design research is really important. It helps you build on it, and it helps you also. I feel like you get exposed to people's work. I think that's the best thing about it, is
Mm.
when I do design research, I discovered people I would never have discovered if I didn't do this project, or discover new books or something like that. And so for me, it's a delight. Yeah, I think that's the best part of doing projects.
That's really important. And I think it's not to say that everything's been done before, so just go and
That's
learn
right.
what others have done. But a lot of things have been done before,
That's
and we
right.
can not just learn from them, but bring them from other fields, other endeavors,
Yeah.
and bring them over into data viz. It doesn't always have to be reinventing the wheel, but of
That's
course
right.
there are elements that are,
Yeah.
brand new, novel ideas. Now, moving on to the kind of, I guess, the material, the data, the information that you eventually visualized and presented. The subject of food. I mean, is this a subject that you are already passionate about? Are you a chef? Are you a kind of a keen cook, or just a keen practitioner of eating food?
No, I don't like cooking. I was gonna say I hate cooking, but that's too strong. I don't like
Yeah,
cooking. I can cook well, I think.
yeah,
I cook food that, people do enjoy.
yeah,
Um, I'm not, I don't know. Although I'm a creative, I don't like thinking up recipes. I don't like
yeah.
to experiment with different spices. So I don't really enjoy it that much. But the reason I focused on food is because it is the most accessible part of a culture. So you don't have to speak the language to
Hmm.
enjoy food or to even try to be curious about the culture behind food. I think it's a great gateway to understanding culture. And so, because this is also a trend I noticed even within my nephews, is like, their language and their ability to speak Mandarin is kind of slipping away, and
Mm.
mine is already like that, right? So I thought, what would entice them to be interested? Because it's just like, oh, here's your family's history. It's so boring, You gotta entice them a little bit,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it'll be like, oh, this is so cool. I want to try to make that. That looks really appetizing.
yeah.
And then maybe it'll get them curious to think about, oh, like there's a story behind it, or this in the past was related to this geography, which is why it was made this way. And then you learn about health. It kind of like opens a whole new world for endless exploration.
Of course, and I suppose it therefore sounds like you also had to go about your own research journey, and you benefited from that as well, probably in terms of
Yeah.
widening the repertoire of meals that you are fluent in making. So, in terms of the actual material, how did you kind of gather the recipes information? Was this speaking to family? Was it about looking at established recipes that exist in other books? How did you kind of collect that kind of side of the information for this project?
Yeah. So I've only made 6 recipe. I've written them out. It was actually really hard to write recipes. I didn't realize how hard it was because it's quite technical. So I just asked my mom for clarification. I would try to write it out myself. I know how to make probably, I don't know, 40 to 50% of them.
Mhm.
So I can sort of build on it. But then when you try to write it out, it's actually, you realize how little you know, because I don't know how many teaspoons of salt I put in there. Because my mom would tell me, oh, it's just a handful, and I'll be like,
Yeah.
what do you mean by a
What does that mean?
handful? Yeah, what does that mean? And then when you try to get her to explain it, she can't. So I had to try to test it out myself. This is actually a lot of work that went into it.
Yeah.
um, and also had to reference existing cookbooks. And honestly, a lot of them are very strict about things. I don't think I like that. I think people try to follow it to a T, which
Mm,
is which can deter people. They feel like, oh, this isn't right because I missed 1 teaspoon. Well,
mm.
it's not about that. It's more about the feel, and I sort of want to encourage that as well. So that's sort of how I collected it, just sort of a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, and that notion of it being about, a kind of a sense of the recipe, a sense of the instructions, I think comes across, because you're right. It can be intimidating to think you've got to go through a science project to make this
Yeah, that's right.
solution, when in fact it is something that's a bit more, sort of fingertip judgments and relatively rough amounts. So I think that does come across. Of course, the other side of the kind of data collection was for the 40 days of your own meal consumptions, and you spoke about how you kind of created a little kind of survey application,
Yeah,
Google form to collect this, which, from what you've just spoken about with regards to kind of time logging, feels very much in line with what you're about anyway.
yeah,
Was
yes,
this going to be the only way that you do it? You can just log in things kind of through that mechanism.
yeah, yeah. So I love thinking about data collection because it's so much fun. So so I had some experience with a previous project doing self collecting data, and it worked really well. So Google Forms for me was great. So what I did in the previous project was I was collecting data while I was going to work, when I was still commuting at the time. This was many years ago. And then
Mm,
I would, every morning, I knew, I'm sort of like, I'm around the same time, I would get a notification from my phone to go to that link and
right.
fill it out. So I'd fill it out when I was on the subway or commuting, and I always set up at the same time. And so that was very structured. It's always through my phone, right? Um, So I collected this one for the recipes. I did it while I was home. So I made it so that I can collect it while I was on the desktop. So I had
Hmm.
it bookmarked. And also I had it also bookmarked in my phone. So if I was away for some reason or I couldn't, I might skip a day, then I need to collect it before I forget. And I also like did pre-filled forms because I'm not exciting person. The food I eat is pretty much the same most of the time. So to save myself time, I actually pre-filled it, which is what Google is great for. They
Nice.
help allow
Yeah.
you to do that. So you can just sort of, if it's the same breakfast all the time, I just click submit. I don't even have
Yeah.
to think about it. So I try to automate it as much as possible because it is hard to do it continuously. Um, and also I was forgiving. I was like, if just because I missed a day or maybe I didn't collect it properly, I can mention that. I can talk about that as like sort of an error, but I don't need to let that stop me from collecting.
Of course. Yeah. And as you said, it's something that even if it's a day late, you can remember what you had yesterday.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
it's not something that's a kind of a moment in time pressure that you've got to face there. And I
Yeah.
think one of the interesting tensions that exists when you are collecting primary data like this is trying to anticipate what you might need,
Yeah, that's right.
judging what's sufficient, what's enough, what's the kind of granularity of these things. So, in the end, did you collect more data than you actually used in the project, and therefore, what explains the data that you kind of effectively discarded? What was the rationale for why you didn't end up using those
Yeah.
elements?
Yeah. So I've always been so I used to work at Kantar and it's a market research firm and um whenever we develop like reports for our clients in PowerPoint and whenever we were thinking about how to collect the data, I wasn't really involved in that process, but the term we always hear is let's collect more than we need or let's show more data than we need and we can always just delete it after. So
Right.
I kind of had that mindset of it's easier to just have it in there and then just remove it later on than to add it later on, right?
Yeah.
And so I was very cautious about okay, let's do everything I need to collect and then I'll think about what I need afterwards. And then so once I started developing it and um, thinking about the actual shape of the data, I tested out different things and sometimes I felt like it was too much information, so I try to clear it out. um, Sometimes I felt like maybe this is better to serve, which is where the vellum comes in. Maybe it's better to just add this information where the vellum is, right?
Right.
Create it more into a narrative instead of just having everything shown because maybe you just needed one point to make a point, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think in the end, it's fair to say that the data that we see in the eventual piece is relatively objective data. Were you inclined to include things like, I enjoyed this meal, or it smelt terrific, or I was under pressure. I know I wish I'd not had to make this meal. Did you collect any of that kind of information and then again decide it didn't kind of fit in with the inquiry that you were trying to present through the data?
Yeah, that's like really tough to collect and be standard about, I think.
Sure.
So I didn't collect any of it, but I tried to include it within the recipe sheet. So I had like a section where I do a little bit of storytelling and I would talk about, what was a story that tied to this dish. My mom would love to talk about some of the dishes she makes to for some of the people she works with, and they'll be like, wow, this is amazing. I scarfed it down when I was in my car, things like that. So I think that's where
Mm,
the written word comes in.
more kind of anecdotal, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
captions, and as you said
exactly.
with the vellum, just to add some extra personality to kind of objective data, I guess.
Exactly.
Now the structure of the data, we've kind of got 40 days worth. Again, we're kind of concentrating for now on the data diary, data documentary. Um, why 40? Just out of
Yeah.
interest.
Yeah. So I think I wanted to do 1 month, but I did a little extra just in case. And I think I might have had maybe 2 more days afterwards. But then to make it look really good on a poster, it's
Right.
good to have like a nice rounded even number. So that's why I chose 40. I could have done 30, but a little extra didn't help. Didn't hurt.
Well, that's it, and I think it's something that we often don't discuss a lot, and we'll come on to later about the kind of composition choices. We know how to fit all this onto a page or onto a kind of
Yeah.
folded artifact, and the number of categories, the number of things, the number of items. This shapes
Yeah.
spatial usage, and another aspect of this, of course, when we look at things like the recipe cards, is there are limits to how many unique, distinct categories of things you could
Yeah.
reasonably include in those. I think the most that I saw, I think, was something perhaps to do with maybe texture, which I think has 8 distinct categories. But if
Yeah.
that extended to 12, 14, I mean, that becomes quite hard to
That's right.
visually represent. There's only so many
Yeah.
unique colors. I mean, were you kind of conscious already of trying to limit the number of distinct things that you were collecting for the design reasons, not just the kind of granularity of the data collection?
Yeah, definitely. I was very concerned with how complex they got because there's so many dimensions to it. There's many considerations. It's not like a normal visualization, right? Where maybe you're confined to 4 or 5. Even small multiples isn't that much, but this one was kind of overkill. And I think I was just trying to stretch to see like what I could do with it. I was just trying to see what I could get away with. But I did try to make it as relative to the data as possible. So say for instance, if I was doing a different cuisine, this would look very different. It would not be able to applicable to like a different cuisine. It's very specific to the style that we cook with.
And on reflection, looking back at the kind of data side of things, are there any things that you look back now and think, I wish I'd done that differently? I wish I'd counted that thing. I wish I'd not spent time collecting that. Do you look at it on reflection with a degree of contentment with the efficiency and the extent that you did collect?
I feel like I shouldn't have done it. Or like, oh, this is terrible. I'm very like a harsh critic, I'll be like,
Sounds
no,
like
this doesn't look great. This is horrible. I shouldn't have done it. Or it's hard to give something that's constructive in response to your question. But I feel looking at it now, I think I feel like if there's too many variables to deal with, and to maybe if there's a better way for me to make more sense of it, if that makes sense. I feel like a lot of people would tell me is I can't read this right off the bat and I can't understand it right away. I don't know what it's talking about. And that's a challenge because you have to figure out how to balance something that's easy to read while being rich with information. It's a huge challenge.
Yeah,
so that's something I want to think more about.
Sure, sorry to interrupt. I mean, I think that's probably the quintessential tension in all of this.
Yeah.
That sweet spot. And especially for something like this, and if you think more about the recipes, I mean, you can't exclude things, otherwise you'll exclude key ingredients or key steps. So there's only so much you can do to simplify that down or reduce it down. So I do think it's something where, I mean, I think if we think about this particular context, recipes will be remade time and time again. The first occasion may be quite, wow, this is a lot to process. But once you've done it once, second time, third time, fourth time becomes quicker. And I think, we should expect for audiences, users to, to sometimes just roll the sleeves up and kind of get into something and put that effort in. Otherwise, they'll lose out if we have to dumb it down further for them. So I think the judgment there is perfect, really. Now, moving on to the actual work itself and the kind of contents that we see, and starting off with the poster about the eating routines. This is about a data documentary of what and how I ate for 40 days in 2020. And actually, just on that, I was kind of curious about this preceded the pandemic and the lockdowns.
Yeah.
Can you, I mean, this is hard to imagine, but can you imagine that this might have been different had you tackled this data collection and the project itself during lockdown, when you're not going out to eat in restaurants and other venues?
Yeah,
do you feel actually quite fortunate that you did this collection in a normal time of life?
Definitely. So I think I when I was thinking about when to start data collection, it was really important I caught it before the Lunar New Year or the Chinese New Year, depending who you talk to. But it was really important I caught it by then, and so because that's a really defining festival for all over Asia, many countries. And I wanted to capture that and also talk about some of the rituals or some of the things we do, right? Everyone goes out for a New Year's Eve dinner, and that's a big thing. And we were able to do that because, before lockdown, and we were able to still go to, for example, visit the temple, and so there's a lot of things we could still do. And I think if we couldn't do that, it's really hard to explain that aspect, because the gathering is a really important part of I think any culture, right? Gatherings is really important, and food is what brings people together. And so I think it would have been very challenging with the pandemic going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So with regards to the what we see, so essentially we've got a layout of all the 3 meals per day for 40 days, and we've got a variety of different representation choices, and you've gone for something that's very kind of symbolic, pictogram, pictorial, isotype, if you like, in nature. We've got colours and letters to indicate the cuisine style. Just on that, I love this sort of design motif that you kind of inspired by this, the cultural mosaic.
Yeah.
Can you just sort of speak to what that's about and kind of why that felt like a useful device to employ for that particular categorization?
Yeah. So that's like one thing that a lot of people use to define Canadian culture. It's this cultural mosaic. It's this idea of cultures being able to exist independently, but also still coexisting at the same
Right.
time, right? And that was a very important visual drive for this. And because I think the big thing that you see here are the colors. Right away, you see the colors, and I think um, when you come to Canada and you go to, like, some of the bigger multicultural cities, it's impossible not to eat food from other cultures, no matter what you do. You can try all you want, but it's impossible. Eat different cuisines influence each other. There's fusions happening. So I think that's a really important thing to mention and to express within that. And that's also why I use watercolor style,
Yes.
because watercolor is very much about that aspect of blending, right?
Yeah.
And also mixing together. But while also you can still see them independently. I think that was a really important aspect to it, and seeing how they mix together and become more beautiful. I think that's sort of the metaphor behind that.
Yeah, and I think that idea of, as you say, watercolor, that kind of opaque, that overlapping, that kind of imperfect or imprecise line.
Yes.
I think that's a really powerful design style, and I don't feel that we see it enough, but also there aren't enough tools that enable that to be digitally automated as a thing. And I'd love to see more tools that embrace these, sort of gooey edges, these kind of imprecise, imperfect representations. But I think I think it works so well, as you said, because it's about blending, but it's about the kind of additive that comes from these four different cultures potentially kind of bringing together, rather than something about, right, you lot are over there and you stay over there, and you lot are over here, you stay over there. I think it works terrifically well. And then we've got things like the arc length, which indicates the time preparation. The markings indicate the side dishes, connecting bands that show when you've made a batch of in cooking. Just on that, was that something, because that is the only one that almost exceeds the natural space of each meal dish area, because it joins these together. Was that, I don't know, was that the last of the representation methods that you could have landed on as a solution? Any other thoughts for how you might have depicted that?
Yeah, so I really wanted to, I always think about what I want to say, and then really try to express that. So the idea with that was try to show how you become efficient with cooking. I think, bulk cooking is something my mom does really well. She's a business owner. She raised us, her kids by herself, right? Like, she doesn't have time.
Yeah.
But she will never buy takeout. Like, you'll never see her buy takeout. We, like, growing up, never had takeout. She always cooked everything, or she had help. We get my aunt to help out, or my cousin, but she never got takeout. And she was really creative in how she made it work. She was really health conscious, but what that led to was we were always eating Chinese food, which is great, right? But we were very close to it. And I think I really wanted to express how she was creative with that. And bulk cooking was one way she was able to do that. So that was really important to include and show how, this is how we were able to do it. Like, people obviously don't have no time to cook, but my mom was really creative with that.
Yeah.
And she would just put something on for a couple hours. She would make a big stew, and then it would last us for days.
That's right. Yeah. And I love that kind of connection between days and between meals. That, let me think about it, that could have been something that you preserved for joining together the same meals, the same recipes, but instead it's about that production side and that kind of efficiency that you speak to there. The other representation choices we've got are the black semicircles for the number of people eating, which again, I love that sort of expanded sort of socialization aspect of it. And then, of course, with this comes the guides for how to read.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm just thinking about the kind of the product itself. Were you thinking always of having a separate material to fold, to unfold, to bring to that, rather than something that was combined within the poster space itself?
Yeah, that was It was a hard choice to make because I could have included all at once. But I think it's because it's so complex, it makes more sense to talk about it one at a time.
Yeah.
So with legends, usually they kind of just put a picture that's already visualized and they just kind of put lines attached to it and just say, this is what this is, this is what this is. And it's like chaos, right? But because I know that I have too many variables to deal with, it makes more sense to describe them one at a time, which is why I did that brochure, which is like, it's at a manageable chunk for you to consume and learn this information, and also you could move it around within the
Yes.
page. I think that's pretty important to compare things. It's not something that you had to keep going up or down on top of the poster, right?
That's right. And it gives you that physical flexibility so that,
Yeah,
if you're looking at something lower down the page, you don't have that journey to the top.
that's right.
You can just
That's
bring
right.
it alongside.
That's right.
But also you can discard it if you've learned it. You can just sort of,
Exactly.
right, don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
We don't walk around with, I don't know, Apple instructions if we've got an iPhone every time, how do I load up my
Exactly.
settings screen? So I do like that sort of separation idea. And obviously the vellum that we spoke to as almost a physical on-demand tooltip that you can overlay
Yeah.
onto different shapes and bring these different textures, not just in terms of the material, but also in the tone of
Yes.
commentary and observations. And I did love how you kind of included that, and it's actually made me think about some of my other projects that I think I wish I'd thought about that idea.
Yeah.
But were you? I'm just thinking because it's a smaller space of vellum that you brought in. Were you thinking about a full page at any
Yeah.
point?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was constrained by the type of material I could get.
Right.
So that's also why it was so small. If I could get 11 by 17, I would have. But it's hard to track materials, especially I never gone to graphic design school, so I was never exposed to printers. I was never
Yeah.
exposed to materials. I didn't learn a lot of things that people would have been exposed to.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to do this on my own. I had to do my own research, go on Amazon and see what's available, look at my local supplier stores, right? And call them too. I had to call them to make sure, to get certain information. And so I was restricted by that. And that was why it's that size. If it was bigger, I probably could have done a lot more. But then it's also like when you think about it, do you want to say that much? Do you need to
That's
say
right.
that much? Maybe having a smaller space is a good constraint to have.
I think it is, and I think it forces you to think, okay, what's the most interesting panel of space that has this
Exactly.
size? Which is the
Yeah.
best view to give
Exactly.
people an extra bit of commentary about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. I think constraints like that can help sharpen the focus about what it is we're trying to say. Onto the recipe sheets and the recipe cards. The recipe sheets themselves are largely textual, although there is a kind of a visual diagram or flowchart to show the process.
Yeah.
Were you ever tempted to make that any more visual with, I don't know, even like a demonstration of pan and things going into the pan and, I don't know, kettle or whatever it may be? Or were you kind of fixed that that would be largely a text product?
Yeah. So a lot of it's physical constraints. So I would have liked to actually print it probably more color. I would have liked to add more color,
Right,
but I was using my home printer, which is black and white. So I
right.
was limited by whatever I had. I would have liked to add some illustrations. I think because this is a visual project, I would have liked to do that. And even at one point when I was just doing the sheets, I was thinking to myself, is this still data viz? I don't know. Like, does this still count? I
Yeah.
mean, there's other parts of it that counts, but does this count? I don't know. I was trying to think how to make it more data vizzy, but
Mm.
it didn't need to. Maybe that was good enough. It just needed to be clear. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about, when does data viz start and stop, and when do other disciplines sort of subtly take over? When does this become an information design project or
Yeah. Yeah.
a graphic design project? And I do wonder if it matters actually. And I think a lot of people are very precious about the thing that they're doing that's not that thing. But I guess if it's all part of a suite of communication with data or information as the raw material, who cares what label you put on it, so long as it does
Yeah.
the job in the end of helping someone cook a cool meal. So I
Yeah.
suppose
Yeah.
that's maybe the ultimate test. The recipe cards themselves are extremely visual, and
Yes.
you've essentially got the photo of the dish on one side and then the visualized details of the recipe and the ingredients on the back. Again, thinking about the photographs, what made you think that this needed a photograph? I mean, it kind of feels obvious, but
Mhm.
you don't have to choose to do that. What made you think this had to be something that's a little glimpse of a rectangle of the plate of the dish?
Yeah. Um, First of all, it's sort of like a good archive project.
Yeah,
You sort of see, oh, this is the kind of plate they used to use. I don't know, maybe
yeah,
like
yeah.
many, many years later on, or this is a table they put stuff on, things, small things like that. I think that whenever I see things like this, I'd always be curious, not about the actual content, but the things
Yeah,
around it. I'll be like, wow, look at that room, look at the
yeah,
decor they had. So I think that was something I wanted to capture. Um, in terms of showing a picture, I think that's what's appetizing about it, because my main goal was to make it so that you get excited about making the
yeah.
food. I really wanted it to be appetizing. And no matter how much data viz you do, it's hard to beat a photo.
It is.
Um, right?
And
You
I
can
think that,
almost smell the food.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, and I think there's also something, I don't know whether it's a deliberate metaphor, but almost like if you put it on its side, you've kind of got on the top the food and how it looks, and then below the surface you've got the ingredients. It's almost like two sides of the same coin. But
Yeah.
the other side, of course, are the kind of the core components, and we've got I think 6 distinct features. We've got the time to cook, which is sort of left right indicator. We've got the pepper, which is the spiciness level, which I
Yeah.
think is a very obvious and immediate
Yeah.
connotation. Um, we've got the core ingredients by type, by condition and quantity, the flavor categories, the texture, and the cooking method. So once again, just I think first question is: were there any other things that you could have included that you didn't on that? Doesn't feel like anything's missing, but
Yeah. It doesn't, I can't think of anything else. I think I really distilled it to what was essential. Yeah.
and it is of it is a dense display.
Yeah.
Were there any of those that you felt you could have removed or you could have abandoned from that display, but chose not to?
Hmm. Hard to say. I can't really give an answer. I don't
I mean,
really know.
I don't. Again, I don't think there's anything there that isn't valuable in the forming the bigger picture.
Yeah.
What's going on, um, and we'll share the images of some of the kind of sketches and the concepts that you went through before you settled on these actual design encodings. I suppose one of the questions here would be, what's your favorite in terms of the design
Oh.
choice that you ended up picking and using? Which is the one that you feel that's a really nice solution? Looking back, I'm glad I kind of ended up with that as a method.
Oh. That's a tough question. Um, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, to be honest, from my perspective, I would say that the texture, when we spoke before about the fact that you've got to show 8 things:
Yeah. Yeah.
soft, firm, chewy, tender, mushy, crunchy, thin, viscous. I mean, that's not easy. I think giving up that much space to those little 8 containers, I think worked really well,
Yeah.
and couldn't have been done in any other way, given what you've already used in terms of colours and space and symbols and quantities.
Yeah.
Um, but again, was this something that you road tested with people to say, do these symbols, do these things make sense, albeit with some companion assistance to learn how to read it?
Oh yeah, I definitely tested it because sometimes they'll say, "Oh, this doesn't look like crunchy." I'm
Right.
like, "Are you sure?" Yeah, you should make it like this. I'll be like, "Would that help?" But yeah, it would be more clear that way. And so
Right.
it's just helpful to do something like that and just to make it more clear because also it's very small,
Yeah.
right? Although like I'm showing the project on screen, if you actually hold the card, it's actually very small. So I had to try to make it very obvious, which was actually quite challenging. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I guess, we've already spoken about so sort of moving on to other design features like annotations. We've already spoken about the how to read guides and the sort of
Yes.
legends and the assistance there. I think one thing I was interested in was what what led you to make it largely English language and to
Yeah.
quite minimize the amount of, I guess, Mandarin? Is that
It would
the
be Chinese. Yeah.
Chinese? Okay,
The writing
right.
would be Chinese.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. What what kind of led you to sort of judge that ratio, that balance between the two language types? And for
Yeah.
example, we attempted to try and get a full Chinese language version.
Yeah. Well, I think in the future, um, I feel like within my family, they'll probably speak more English than Chinese
Right.
or Mandarin. They won't be able to read as well, but I still include it because the thing with this is English translations of recipes is really bad. So if you try to look them up and try to find the Chinese corresponding one, you won't find it.
Right.
So say for instance, if they really wanted to make this dish, they can show someone the Chinese characters or like try to type it up if they knew how
Yeah.
to type it up, and they'll still be able to find it. I did include ways to read it. So in Chinese, you can add something called pinyin, which teaches you how to read them. And I did add that within the recipe sheet. So if in case someone wanted to learn how to read it, they could, right? And so it was more about being accessible and being something that also invited them to learn more if they wanted to.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. Now we've spoken about colours with the sort of the cultural mosaic that we spoke to before, and the colours that you've used in both the kind of imagery of the photographs and also the kind of categorizations of the ingredients. Were there any colours that you felt that you wanted to avoid using, or I guess stylistically, again thinking back to your production side, did you want to keep it quite clean? I mean, the background is white, the material is white largely, and it's quite a sort of nicely sort of subdued and almost, I don't know, sort of self-confident level of color usage. It's not shouting at you, it's not kind of vibrant
right.
in every. And did you feel that sort of stylistically that was a tone you were trying to get the right balance of?
Yeah, I think so. I think with even with the watercolors, it was nice and calming, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't very loud, it was quiet. And I think the most important thing was it felt welcoming, it felt hospitable. And I wanted to show diversity, which is why the colors I chose was there. They're different enough to be diverse.
Yeah.
And I wanted to express that within food. I think that's an important part of identity as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
And just sort of wrap up the design discussion, are there any other sort of little features that people would miss or not appreciate or don't appreciate what pain you went through to get there? I mean, one of those might be just the folding mechanism and the kind of mechanics of the sequencing. Any other things you want to sort of share with people?
Call your printers. Honestly, it was really hard to get a size I wanted. I initially found a size. I had a size I was referencing based on something that existed, and I thought, oh, maybe they printed it here. It's quite common for people to print out of country, and I had to learn that the hard way. And also, I wish I called my printers ahead of time to get specifications, because I feel like when you do analog work, a lot of it has to go backwards. You have to figure out who is the production, who are you working with the print shops, what do they need from you, what are their specifications. And I didn't do that at first. I just kind of naively started designing, thinking this would work. And then when I realized it wasn't possible, because it could be possible, but it's just going to be very expensive. You have to make it too custom, right? You have to have someone who does very custom work. And so if you wanted something that was more if I wanted something that was more with my budget, I would have to work with the print shops. And so that was like a really painful part. And it made me almost like consider just like stopping all ago, because I was like, I couldn't find what I needed. So, I'm learning a lot about print and production. And I think it's just something that it's easy to overlook.
Yeah. I agree. I have had an experience recently of printing a book output of a work, and had I made it 101 grams lighter, it would have been loads more cheaper to produce and to send out in postage costs.
Right.
It's the sort of thing, I guess, you only know once you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've gone through the pain barrier, but you probably won't make the same mistake twice. I think it's probably the best thing, and you'll tell plenty of others to watch out. So I guess, kind of big picture now, looking back, you've had enough distance from the work now to kind of reflect on it. How do you feel about it? Did you enjoy it? Did you find things that you kind of just, I don't know, really kind of appreciated having gone through the learning experience, the opportunity to try something? Kind of where you're looking now at a distance on this project reflectively?
That's a very heavy, loaded question. Yeah, I think I'm glad I did it. I can't believe I did it. I mean, it's crazy that I did so much for it. I committed a lot to it, and even the video, everything I do, I don't really know how to do it the first time. I just kind of learned as I went. And I'm really glad I did do it. And thinking back, like I initially made cards. I like cards because you can shuffle through it, you can compare. And I actually had one incident where actually I was able to use the cards.
Wow.
I had a wisdom tooth extraction, so I can only eat mushy food.
Oh, okay.
Wow, right? How useful is that? So I actually went through the deck and I found all the mushy food, and I was like, oh, I can actually eat all of these things. This deck works. I was able to identify the food I can eat really, really quickly. So that was really fun. It is also a little bit sad because I told myself this will be one of the more, not last one, but it'll be something I'll commit large scale personal
Mm,
for. I won't do another one like this for a while
mm.
because it's such a big commitment and it requires so much. So for me, it was sort of a way to sort of close that part of my life because I
Right.
did so many personal projects, and I think I got what I needed out of that, which was
Yeah.
discovering a style, understanding my strengths, and establishing a new vision for myself.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a really good project to kind of close that chapter of my life.
Absolutely. And I think it's a tremendous piece of work, and I just love um, the different products that come with it, and
Yeah.
the courage to do these different physical products as well. But also just let's face it, the whole point of this endeavor is to create something that will work, that will allow, as you said before, future generations to pick these up and run with them, and to make them, then pass them on, and maybe even
Yeah.
deviate and try different amounts of salt
Yeah.
or of ingredients. So I think as a measure of success, that has to be the overriding thing, and it did achieve that. So I think it's wonderful, and I really appreciate as I said before, the depth in the thinking that you demonstrate in these companion blog posts and videos. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to speak with you about this project. Thank you so much, Jane, for going through that today, and thank you to all the viewers and listeners for tuning in today. We'll see you soon with the next episode of Explore Explain. Thank you. To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.